Dan, let's hop into our topic. So the topic we're going to, start off with is how to tell stories with your camera. First of all, let me ask you this question. What does that mean to tell stories with your camera? Does your camera start talking, or how does that work?
Modern cameras, I guess it's possible. I'm sure that there's a
That'll
camera
be the
out there
next
that talks.
generation.
Yeah, the problem is, what if it talks back? Then you're in a fight with your camera in the street. That would probably not be great.
It'll be
I
like,
think,
dude, if you shoot here, this is going to completely suck. Stand over there,
yeah,
dummy. Hey,
yeah,
adjust your
feedback can be
aperture.
good. Uh, telling stories is really the key with story is obviously there's a narrative involved, and I think a lot of people who get focused on photography, you get past that initial excitement about being a photographer and going into the field, and you're making random photographs, and then all of a sudden maybe you look at two what you thought were random photographs and you see a connection, and that's how it starts. And then you say to yourself, oh my god, I can tell stories with this. These are classically known as photo essays or photo stories. When I was coming up in photography and I studied photojournalism, everything was very much about story. Now, when you worked at a newspaper, oftentimes everything had to be summed up with a single photograph. That was sort of the goal. But you also ran what was called picture packages, which was three, four, five pictures that told a story. And then, if you were very fortunate, you would get time off to work on a classic photo essay or photo story, and that could be anywhere from 20 to 50 photographs depending on how much time you had. I think the photo book is the perfect example of Jerry Badger was the guy who said photography is a story best told in book form. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And a photo book is very different from a photo portfolio. I'm not
Yeah.
really that interested in photo portfolios. I don't really have a portfolio anymore, but I'm not working as a photographer, so I don't necessarily need a portfolio. I would much rather tell a story with pictures than try to show you like five random images that I think are really solid on their own. There's a place for both of those things. But telling a photo story requires you to tell a narrative. Narratives have an arc.
Yeah.
Good narratives and good stories have an arc. And you also have to make pictures that don't necessarily, they may not be aesthetically pleasing, but they're informational images that help the reader understand the story that you're trying to tell. And so working in story form is a very different mindset than working in single pictures, random pictures, or portfolio style things. Within your photo story, you may have a portfolio image, but that image on its own may not do a whole lot to tell a story. It just may be an incredible aesthetic image, or you got lucky on timing, or something happened and it's a once in a lifetime thing, and you make this picture and you go, wow, as a standalone image that's incredible, but if I just show that image, no one's going to understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So things like images like scene setters, portraits, details. I think a good photo story often has intimate images, what I would call tight images. It has long images and it has middle distance images. And to me, and I just was looking at this the other day. I'm about to do a little YouTube film about the Leica Oscar Barnack Award. The 2021 newcomer award went to this young German photographer, and he did a project called The Road of Bones, which is in Siberia. And Leica did a film about him, which is basically an interview with him, and they show a lot of the work, and I think it's a really solid body of work. And I think the images of that body that jumped out at me were his middle distance images, and that's a sweet spot that takes a lot of time to really master. I think long lens stuff and wide angle stuff comes first, and those middle distance images are hard to do. They're hard to make, and he does it really well. And also I wanted to sort of tip the hat to Leica for doing a film about not just a camera equipment, but about a real body of work, like a real photo story. And that's it to me. I always worked in story form for whatever reason. I was never a big onesie twosie photographer. I always wanted to shoot essays, and I'm still doing it all these years later.
Awesome. Now, hey, let's unpack the arc a bit in case Not everybody understands that, because that's a really important concept in filmmaking and writing. People, when you see a film and it doesn't resonate with you, 90% of the time it's because it did not follow a story arc. And there's just this classic setup for a story that goes back thousands of years. So explain that in terms of a photo story.
Yeah, so your narrative is going to depend on two things. It's going to depend on your edit, and it's most importantly going to depend on your sequence. And sequencing of a story often gets overlooked. Everybody talks about, making the best possible pictures you can in the field. That's step one. Obviously, you want to make the best possible work. And then two, your edit is really critical. And editing itself is an art form. And it's not one that gets a whole lot of talk because most people, including myself, most people are not very good at editing. Now I'm okay because I've been doing it for a long, long time. And there were moments in my life, or times or years actually in my life, where I was shooting for clients and having to shoot, edit, and sequence every single day. When you do that year after year, you tend to refine your skill set, but that doesn't ensure that you're going to be a great editor. So you have to make the best possible work, step one. Step two, you have to make the tightest, most cohesive edit you can. And then step three is the order in which you deliver those images for your narrative. And here's the fun part, and here's the danger zone, Kenny Loggins. So the fun part is sequencing is great. It's fun. It's a challenge. But you get your sequence wrong and your story never flies. It never gets off the ground. A single picture out of place at the front of a story can kill the entire thing. So this happened to me once with a project I had done, which was a project about religion. And I had the sequence was started with sort of a landscape image that showed a very specific style of city and town. And that was an indicator as to where this body of work was based. And then I went to an image that I thought was sort of a location-based image. And then I went to an image that I thought was representative of my style as a photographer. The problem was that image had connotations that could be easily misconstrued if you weren't paying attention. And the person reviewing my work saw that image, thought it was a story, not about religion in Europe, saw people in hoods and immediately identified that with the Ku Klux Klan, slammed the book in my face, and then stormed off and said, "I refuse to look at this work." Now, it's their fault for not paying attention.
Yeah.
But two, I should have chosen another image for that, because one, I can't put that image on the cover, because if I do, how many people are going to look at it and make the same mistake?
Do the same thing, yeah.
And if I put a landscape image on the cover, which was the first image inside the book, was a landscape. But if I put the landscape on the cover, people are going to assume it's a book of landscape photography, and I'm not a landscape photographer. So all I'm saying is one wrong move with the sequence of an image, or the wrong placement, and the whole thing doesn't work. And that should not be a deterrent. That should be a challenge to say, how am I going to get people up this arc? And the analogy that I always use is the roller coaster. When you get on a roller coaster, they take you up that agonizing, slow climb where, if you're like me, clicking, and you have all the time in the world to say, why did I get on this?
Why am I on this thing? I hate those things. Yeah.
I do too. And then they hit you with the drop. And that's what a good story is going to do, is really take you up and down and up and down and get you through it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, listen, we've had some really great examples in our AYP Plus group, bringing people from the single image kind of mindset to putting a story together. And I saw it absolutely transform photographers. It's just amazing. So I am convinced that the way to teach photography is to bring people on board with, telling that sequential story. Because you're right, Dan, all of a sudden that one image may be the most incredible image in the world, but if it doesn't work, so what? Doesn't tell your story, boom, you move it out, do it, use it for something else, but not for that.
Well, so, I think So let me just say this real quick.
Yeah,
I'm a journal. I keep a journal every day, and those
me
onesie
too.
twosie images, those random images that they work really well for the journal. They may not be part of a story. They may not be need to be considered at that level, but you make them anyway, and the journal is a great outlet for those. But the story is where, things really it makes you think a lot more about what you're doing. And the secondary thing I want to say is when you start to make photographs of stories and shoot photo essays, you do not throw images away. You do not throw anything away, because when you go back to these stories and you are trying to composite and build stories, and if you've thrown away everything except the handful of images that you think you're going to need, you are shooting yourself in the foot. And sometimes people get rankled by that because archiving imagery is not easy and it's not inexpensive, especially when you start to acquire a lot of images. And take me for example. I've probably got 60 terabytes of images, at my house in storage, and I've got 40 more terabytes that are in an active archive, and that's not including any of the motion content that I'm making. And so all of that has to be backed up in duplicate or triplicate, which means also online. So a lot of times people will just give up and they'll say, oh, that's ridiculous and there's no need to keep all this stuff. The people who are saying that don't make good photo essays, because there is no photographer walking the face of the earth that makes a good photo story or essay by only keeping what they think they're going to need. It doesn't work that way. You will go back and you will look at a photo essay in your sequence and there will be a gap. And oftentimes, like if I do a photo story and I'm working in Europe for a month and I come home and then the next year I go to Europe for another month and etc., I'm not going to have a chance to go back and finish or work on that story potentially for another year. And if I'm putting something together and I've only kept this handful of images that I think are my keepers and I've got a gap in my sequence, where am I going to get that stuff? Which forces you to go back to the work that you have and find transitional images that work to bridge those gaps. And if you're throwing things away or you're just lazy and you say, well, I don't want to pay for storage, then I wouldn't bother trying to do photo essays, because you're going to go back and mine that B level, C level imagery all the time. Because again, let me just remind people, a photo essay is not a portfolio. It's not 10 of your great images. It's 10 images that work cohesively together to tell a narrative. And that is a very different and a very specific way of working. And so when I ask archiving questions, oftentimes I get these irate answers from people like, why are you saving all that stuff? And it's like, well, because I've been shooting photo essays for 35 years. And I know that those, what I think is a B image or a C image right now, that might save me a month from now when I need to tell this story.
Please subscribe and enable the bell so you don't miss any of our new shows. Like the video and please share it and leave your comments. I love hearing from you. And remember to get out and capture your own images of life.